Hello, Silas here. I'm back with Steven. You can say what's up to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
We do this starts in different ways every time, but we're
Yeah.
here for what is probably going to be the last part, or maybe the first half of the last part of the reading of this amazing article from Time Magazine from Molly Ball. I've been laughing almost every start of it because it's still just absurd throughout the whole thing. It's called "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." And Stephen, tell us a bit about why we're reading this and how it's been going.
So the way I stumbled upon this was one of my Facebook friends posted an excerpt from it. Again, as I've said a few times now, it was one of those things that I was skeptical if this was a real article. I didn't know if it was one of these Babylon Bee type things. Someone was satirizing a real article, but nope, I looked it up. This was an actual article. So I read it. Silas looked at it as well, and we decided to do a video series on it. And it's been pretty fun and interesting so far.
Yeah, it's been good going back and forth with this. And with the field of politics, it's one of the few fields that people actually take pride in. They say, like, I don't like talking about politics. Whenever I don't talk about politics, my life is better. Or let's not talk about, let's avoid this. And then it's different in the sense that they also participate in it, not just the voting, but in specific, they want to give opinions of it. They want to give
Yeah.
opinions and make declarations that are politically based and engage in that. Whereas if someone was, for example, not really familiar with the sport of curling, you might still watch it when the Olympics comes by, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't be in there being like, that person should have done this instead. Like,
No.
I don't like the technique of this person do. They should try and score there. People in other fields, be like, I really don't know what's going
Yeah.
on there. I'm not going to suggest, like, oh, there's something wrong with my tooth. I'm not going to suggest what I should do with it. I'm going to go to a dentist.
Yeah.
There's other fields where people kind of do that. And when it comes to politics, everybody, I think because you have that universal suffrage, people are kind of like, okay, well, let's just participate in it. Now, when it comes to conversing about things, having conversations, specifically with Trump, I think he has been unprecedented in the sense, maybe with Obama in some kind of way where they were saying Obama was going to do all these great things without knowing anything about what Obama had done or could do. So
Yeah.
that was in one sense. But then the inverse kind of happened with Trump, where they say he did all these negative things without actually knowing what Trump did or said or anything. They just
Yeah.
assumed that the people who were reporting on it were saying the truth, and they assumed the people who told them Obama was going to be the Messiah were saying the truth, and none of those things were true.
No.
So when it came to this, I decided let's actually have this reading and let's have this talk. And one of the positive things that I've seen is what I think this article is. It's X. So X is what X is. X is the reality. Problems occur how we define X. Trump and other people have been defining it all these other things, Y, Q, B, all these other things. Then these people are coming out in this Time article and saying, okay, this is actually Z. It's none of those other things. But
Yeah.
when it comes down to the X, I think keep that in mind. Some of the things in here being mentioned, I think you could probably think of a few things you'd heard or seen that were being said by people who are more pro-Trump that were being treated in an interesting way. Now think about how those things are being treated when they're being said here in the Time magazine article. Just the things, not the opinionate, not the editorializing of it, but when they say like a simple thing in the last one, and they're like, "Oh, we were able to tell the people who were organizing these protests and get them together, who had this network online, and then we were able to get them to stand down."
Yeah.
What would you think if Trump had come out with an admission of something like that? How you think that would have been treated if there was like Steve Bannon had come out and said, "Yeah, we had we had these hundreds of things all around the country, and then we told them to stand down." Would you be declaring that Steve Bannon should not have been pardoned and should be in jail over that thing? Those are the kind of questions that I think
Yeah.
are good to keep in mind as we get this going. Anything else?
Well, and just to add on to restate what I said in the last video about, again, where do you draw the line of what's a riot versus a protest? It's like some of the people at the Capitol Hill were just standing outside. They all didn't rush in. Are those people rioters? And then, okay, there were riots in the summer. You saw buildings on fire. You saw businesses get destroyed. Are those protesters? Are you just telling me rioting versus protesting is depending on who's doing it, or is there an objective criteria? If you just want to take a side, fine, but just admit to me in advance, okay, I'm just siding with these people because I feel what they're doing is right versus these people are wrong. Again, I obviously disagree with that, but at least it's honest and straightforward.
Yeah, and another thing that's important with this is this content coming out that I'm sure, no matter what you think their reason for doing it is, this information is not information that's going away anytime soon.
No.
So I suggest, if you haven't listened to the rest of the series, if you've been listening to us, welcome back and thanks for listening. You can go back and listen to the other ones we've discussed, or just go to the links below and read this for yourself, because this is going to be content. There's been some historical things that happened that have been kind of overshadowed by all these other shenanigans and things going on. I was re-listening to the older parts of this so I can get clips out to put them up, and thinking it was part 2 where we were talking about, we're still before the impeachment trial. Now the impeachment trial is already over. It took about 5 days to get the thing done, and the shenanigans that are coming out with that too. Like, what was it? The due process wasn't actually allowed, because in due process, it's normally take longer to actually establish the case. The person can actually be, okay, why are you putting this up? They go into fact finding and things like that, and they come up with that. What was another thing that wasn't in there? Okay, Trump definitely wasn't present. As you said, the Chief Justice wasn't there, wasn't supposed to preside, because he's supposed to preside. Yes, he was impeached while he was still president, but the actual documents were given to the House of Representatives and the Senate when there was a different House of Representatives and the Senate in there. And then when the constitutionality of the thing was up in question, then towards the end of it, they decided, let's actually get a witness in here. And then after they finally vote on the witnesses and things like that, and they say, okay, we're going to have a witness, and the Republicans say, yeah, we're going to get a lot of witnesses in here, starting with Mayor Muriel Bowser. I might be saying that name wrong. I think it is Bowser. I'm going between browser and browser. I'm like, browser is the web browser, and Bowser is like the villain from from Super Mario.
Yeah.
But they were going to get them out there, and Nancy Pelosi to come out and then ask them, what evidence did you have ahead of time about the potential threats? Because I saw reports shortly after what happened on January 6th that Trump had suggested that they should have more National Guard there present. And then they said, oh, no, we don't want more National Guard there present because we don't want it to look like that show of force. We don't like the optics that gives. So we just want to have a limited amount of the Capitol Hill police mostly. And that's what that's what they went to. Those reports are out there. I think there's actual quotes of Muriel Bowser saying that, at least. And then at that point, they say, okay, we're not going to do that. Then they come out and they start blaming the Republicans for not allowing these things. Nancy Pelosi comes out with that situation. And it's just part of this episodic life that we live, where certain things happen. It's like the same characters, but every new show, it's like nothing happened. Think about there's certain shows where it's like 24, which is a popular show in the United States of America sometime, where it's every show is an hour of 24 hours. There's 24 episodes in the season, so it's all connected. What happened before is remembered in the next show. Then you go to like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where it's like the same characters each show, the same location. But what happened in previous show almost like is not really accounted for unless it has to have something to do with the plot. Like maybe a new character is introduced, then that character might come in later on in another series, another episode. But what they did in the previous episodes isn't necessarily canon, isn't necessarily in there. I think this article is canon. This article is that kind of material, whether you're going in the seasonal kind of the series kind of life or episodic. This is a canon kind of thing where this is something that will be referred to back to by a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, I was going to add to that, the Simpsons is probably the epitome of what you're describing. Like each episode follows that exact formula where things are kind of normal. Something happens. There's some monumentous event. At the end, everything's back to normal. Even the movie itself followed that same pattern. Like the town gets destroyed and everything, and they all rebuild their houses exactly as they were. That like. It's like every single episode, things always go back to the way they were. That's the pattern. Then, like you say, there are big general things that happen once in a while, like Maude Flanders getting killed off. I guess the actress left the show. Edna Krabappel, I think that actress actually died, so they took that character off. Things like that. But in general, it's each episode is kind of like its own thing. It always goes back to normal. And I think there's a few episodes where they've even stated that, like, hey, you said things would go back to normal, because that's the pattern of the show. Yeah.
And I have a question about part of what I've been interested in is storytelling in the creative field in that kind of sense, animation, video games, going from like static art to motion art to interactive art. And I think the structure that we have, and we mentioned this in previous discussions of this, where there's some parts where the stories we tell are kind of things that shape the way the X. It's not the X. X is reality, but the whether it's Y, whether it's Z, all these things, those are structures. Now, even just the letters that I'm using. X is a letter in an alphabet, in the Arabic alphabet. So it's also limiting. Now I'm picking between those 26 letters to make my point. But reality is a lot more than 26 letters. So those kind of things kind of shape the way we look at things. And maybe we have a maybe we've been more used to approaching life in this episodic sense. That's why we can say, okay, Trump is his own things, Obama is his own things, Bush before were his own things, Clinton were his own things. Or we have this ability of thinking they should be an arc, they should be a villain, they should be a good guy, and we try to shove reality into that instead of just finding better ways to understand what reality is. So I think with some of that, it's good to see at least this is what their side of the X is. This is what other people's side of the X is. And I think one of the worst things for me was during this time from even during Trump's time, but specifically after the election until this article come out, nothing has come out this open about, from the left, talking about the things that I think were actually substantial that were being brought up. So this, I think, at least for on that aspect, to me is positive. And to see how other people see those things, same things happen for different reasons, different things happen for the same reasons. So this is the kind of thing that I think is positive in the sense, like, a simple thing I had mentioned before with the National Guard. They didn't want the National Guard in there because they didn't want to send a negative message, or we're militarizing the location. They didn't want the optics with that. But then now they're like, yeah, we're going to have the National Guard in here until the end of the year. We're going to have why? What message are they trying to send now? What has changed so much? So that's the kind of things that I'm just seeing here.
And I would just say, I think I mentioned this in a last video, but to any Democrats or left-leaning people, I'm just looking for what your principles actually are. Are you really concerned with money influencing politics, or do you only care if it's the other side? Do you care about war, but only if it's Republicans? Do you care about cronyism and corruption, but only if it's Republicans? Then it comes down to, do you really fundamentally care about these principles, or are you just a partisan and you're just taking a side because you feel somehow that's going to achieve what you want? And then what is it you're looking to achieve? These are some of the questions that I've been asking. Do you just want wealth redistribution and you think the Democrats are going to be a better vehicle for that, so you're willing to tolerate other things? I'm just trying to understand some of these angles, because you can't, it's like with the Me Too, believe all women, all this other stuff. Do you actually care about these things, or is this just opportunism as a way to discredit your opponent so you can gain power? What do you care about the thing in of itself, or are you willing to put up with this as means to a greater end? It's like the woman who will date the rich, good-looking but abusive husband because she sees it as, well, I'm willing to go through this because long run, well, I'm going to have a comfortable lifestyle, I'm going to be respected, all that. So you're willing to put up with those things. It's the ends justify the means. I'm wondering if that's the case with some of the Democrats out there, if any of you are watching.
Yeah. And this is something that is a general thing that we have to ask ourselves. Why do we tell the lies that we tell? And I have a general premise, another observation about society is the structures are normally, like in groups, are normally decided, friendships, relationships are decided due to the lies we tell each other and accept rather than the truth. Because if it's just pointing out the truth, anyone can do that. A complete stranger can come in and walk in and tell you what the truth is. Yeah. But it takes somebody who knows you to have that ability to think, oh, I don't think this person wants to hear this at this time. Or I think this person might act in this kind of way, so I'm going to avoid saying this. Oh, if this person hears this in particular, then the chances are I'm going to be able to get this thing I want from that person. So those are the kind of things that I think build these up. And to me, that's not something that I enjoy. I'd rather we get as close to reality as possible. And I'm hopefully going to continue to provide this platform and things like this and put this invite out to other people out there. So there might be other topics, other people from different points of view in different kind of places who are going to want to actually engage in conversation, not just the whole, oh, we need to have a conversation about, and then you start asking them questions. How dare you want me to actually prove this? I'm a black person. I don't even have to. How dare you have me actually?
In Potthorser's presentations, winning the vote was only the first step to winning the election. After that came winning the count, winning the certification, winning the electoral college, and winning the transition. Steps that are normally formalities, but that he knew Trump would see as opportunities for disruption. Nowhere would that be more evident than in Michigan, where Trump's pressure on local Republicans came perilously close to working, and where liberal and conservative pro-democracy forces joined to counter it. All right.
Okay, with here, Potthorser was the person in the second section of this. He was considered the architect. He's a guy working behind the scenes to organize most of these things. And a previous question that I've had here, and I'll add some thoughts that I was having right after the elections happening, I was like, okay, people are coming out and proposing certain things. I'm like, okay, if this is happening, they're talking about we can't do the check of the actual votes, for example. This is an example. This is theoretical. I'm not saying this happened, but I was saying, okay, if they're not actually checking the signatures, or if the numbers are coming in, they're not allowing people to actually do the hand count, why are they delaying so much? Because
Yeah.
if they get the actual numbers in, then they can get to the point where they're like, okay, we're missing this many people, so let's make sure when the people come in, there's actually enough of the votes. Because you can still do that. I was like, who is actually double checking and securing the location where these ballots are, where they're
Yeah.
not trying to actually match it up to the numbers that are actually there? Like, let's see, what's going on in that? Like with stuff like this, a simple thing is, I was seeing the proposed numbers of Biden is supposed to win Ohio about +8. That's what most of the people were saying.
Yeah.
Yet they're claiming that Podhoser and other people in the alliance and things like that, they had actually more accurate figures of what was going to happen, especially in the swing states. So if they had that information, like for example, for me to think that this is just not them waiting to see what the arguments were and then coming out with this kind of thing, trying to make sense of what people said, if they could just simply show that actually Podhorzer knew that Michigan in particular was going to be a key state, and here is the data that he submitted to this location back in October, back in August. So then it's like, then it makes more sense rather than, okay, yeah, Michigan was one of the big points. So now you're saying Michigan was one of the things he was interested in. What other states was he interested in? Was he like, okay, Florida's not going to be an issue? That's why that's why you're not mentioning Florida here. What is the thing? I just have some questions about when Podhorzer actually knew this information and why he didn't put it out. And maybe the explanation is he didn't put it out because he didn't think if he put it out, they thought someone was going to counter it. And since he didn't put it out, they end up getting Biden in there. So I don't know. Just let me know that one.
Well, and also too, I was going to say, they talk about Trump disrupting it. Well, again, he had a right to contest the election, and as we stated before, Democrats contested every election since the 70s or 80s, except for Reagan, I think, because Reagan won in a massive blowout second time around. So naturally, if Reagan won, what was it, like 48 states or something? It's like at that point, it's like, okay, fine, we lost, but it's like, they're going to contest every election, but then if a Republican does it, it's disrupting it. It's like, well, what do you guys do every time you think you didn't actually lose? So I can't help but think they're coming at this from the angle of, if Trump had won, they would have found any excuse they could have to discredit it. It would have been foreign interference. It would have been fraud. There would have been some factor they would have come up with. They were not prepared to accept a Trump victory no matter what.
And we're not making this up because we have the last 4 years of evidence for that. If you're going to that episodic type of life, those the reruns of those things are still available online. You can find them and see that that's what the script was for the last 4 years.
And again, like I said previously, Hillary could have questioned it. I don't mind people questioning the results, but it's like, you can't say we won, clearly it was fair and square. The other side won, well, clearly they cheated every time. It's like, that's part of democracy. You do lose elections from time to time.
Yeah, there were still interviews in 2020 of Hillary Clinton with Chelsea Clinton there saying he knows he's a legitimate president.
Yeah.
Like, this was things that they were still saying. So
Yeah.
And that also came up, and this is what I wonder. This happens to me too. There's some things that come up in this conversation series that we've been having, just specifically reading this, where I'm repeating myself because it's something that I said before, but I forgot the context that I said it.
Yeah.
So this happens. So maybe the politicians are doing the same thing, where they're telling Trump is guilty of this because he said fight, and then when they have themselves being played on national TV in that hearing of 15 minutes or so of different politicians coming out and saying that, maybe to them they forgot that they said that. When Maxine Waters was actually confronted by somebody on like CNBC, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't say that." They literally played her the video of her saying that. She's like, "No, that didn't happen." When you have some politician come out and say, "Oh, I happened to notice that when you were playing this video, there was a lot of black women," and it's like, wait. I thought it was a good thing that there's many black women being represented in politics. I thought that was something that was positive. Yeah. Now that there's actually black female presentation, it's racist. What are you trying to hint at? It maybe, just maybe, there might be an issue if black women happen to be out there talking about fight a lot. Like, you might now say, oh, but it's the context of fighting for racial justice and all these things. Well, why are you assuming the negative context in the things that Trump was saying? Maybe it's because you have some guilt where you understand you couching it in that language of racial justice also resulted in violence. So you also think that there's people on the other side who, if they hear it count as fight for the Constitution for your country, that's not pro-democracy, and that leads to violence in some kind of sense. Maybe there's some kind of admission in there. I don't know. I'm not reading their minds. Just putting these thoughts out there.
Well, it was like I brought up with the RNC too. They complained, oh, there's these minorities. These are all tokens. These are sellouts. These aren't real black people. But I know how this operates. If it was all white people, they would have said, hey, where are the minorities? Where are the women? Where's the representation? I know exactly how this game goes, guys. Come on, don't BS me here.
Yeah. Okay. Next section. Next chapter. Okay. It was around 10 p.m. on election night in Detroit when a flurry of texts lit up the phone of Art Reyes III. A busload of Republican election observers had arrived at the TCF Center where votes were being tallied. They were crowding the vote counting tables, refusing to wear masks, heckling the mostly black workers. Reyes, a Flint native who leads We the People of Michigan, was expecting this. For months, conservative groups had been sowing suspicion about urban vote fraud. The language was, they're going to steal the election. There will be fraud in Detroit long before any vote was cast, Reyes said.
All right, so the usual race baiting crap, it's, again, Trump won support among minorities, but of course they're framing this as Democrats are the party of minorities. These are evil white racists who are trying to disrupt a legitimate election. Of course, no mentioning without the mask because they're trying to scare people they're spreading COVID. It's the usual dishonest framing. I know how it's stuff I've harped about already, so I'm not going to say much more.
And they have the picture here of the Trump supporters seek to disrupt the vote count at Detroit's TCF Center. Are they disrupting the vote count, or are they not being allowed into the actual place where they can actually count the votes?
Yeah.
Why are they picking on somewhere like Detroit? Is it because Detroit happens to have a history of this going on, a history of other issues? If you want to deny there's a history, just go online and look. There actually is a history of fraud with local politicians and things like that. That is a known factor. They look at certain places and there are certain issues in certain places. Who cares if it happens to be mostly black people working there? And again, with the capitalization of black here. And the last thing here, the mention of Flint, Michigan. They're trying to throw that in there. Flint, Michigan. I don't know if they just I don't know if there's many other people that they've mentioned the actual locations these people from are and things. Okay, so the guy was in Flint native, but he lives We the People. But the Flint, Michigan was where the water was poisoned by the government, and they still haven't actually dealt with it. I still don't understand how it's taken this long to actually have that thing dealt. That just shows the things of how the government. It's gone through Democrats, Republicans, Democrats. It's still a freaking mess in Flint, Michigan. And with Flint, Michigan, there was one thing to think. If you think this pandering is one way or the other, it's not. That's where the location where Obama went, and he was talking to them. He's like, can you give me some glass of water? And then somebody gave him some water. He's like, yeah, this is some good water. He was trying to pretend he's one of the people. And then he did it again when he was sitting with the different people at the table. He took a sip of the water. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm sure you just went to the actual reservoir and took a cup of that and gave it to Barack Obama. But just that pandering is just there. I'm not even saying if Trump had done that. I'm saying like already, if Biden does something like that, I think you're going to see him get eviscerated in a different sense. I think there might be a little bumper time, but you're already starting to see people get at Biden because I think people had forgotten. Maybe even the media had really forgotten what covering an actual politician was. Because as you've mentioned before, they had to use kid gloves with Obama. And then after the kids' gloves, they put on the boxing gloves or those UFC like half gloves, and they were ready to go for 4 years. And then now it's back to the what's it called? Now it's back to the to the deputy press corps person of Biden's team coming out, and we mentioned this I think in the last part of this, but he's since stepped down because Biden had come out and said, "Oh, if anybody's working for me and I hear them harassing any one of their coworkers, they're fired immediately." So this person came out and they're talking to someone in Politico, and she was reporting on him having a relationship with somebody else that was covering them from Axios, and this was supposed to be off the record. And he was excoriating her. He was saying, "I'm going to destroy you. You're just mad because this man didn't want to F you. He wanted to F the person that he's actually dating and things like that." And then the press secretary the main press secretary was talked about to Psaki, And then they said, okay, it's just a 1 week suspension without pay. And then some people are saying, he has stage 4 cancer. How are you going to push this on him? Like, there's an actual enough thing. Like, it was off the record. Like, this person shouldn't have talked about it. But that just shows both sides. And then now he's stepped down because people in the media were thinking, are so used to Trump time where whatever Trump says, you just leak it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just leak it. Off the record, we leak it. So this person, Me Too era and all those things, and she thought it was off the record, doesn't matter. I'm going to leak it. Then some people were like, but it's off the record. You're kind of ruining the kind of integrity of, like, anything off the record is supposed to be off the record. So there's all these questions coming in. Is Biden actually going to hold people to this? Are we going to cover this? So it's an interesting time coming up that we're seeing with this.
Yeah, and with Flint, Michigan too, it's interesting because it's one of those things where they constantly blame the previous Republican governor. There's a few issues here. Well, number one, the academic who exposed this actually came under fire because they talk about this in that book Scientocracy that I mentioned briefly in a previous video, because they explain how corrupt it is. Because the thing is, if you say things critical of the government, you're an academic, they cut your funding. So the academic who came out and said, look, there's issues with the water in Flint, Michigan, we got to do something. His colleagues were saying things like, shh, don't say this. You say this, they're going to cut our funding. Don't say anything. But he said, look, I see something wrong. I have to say something. And of course, he got destroyed for it. And then again, they keep blaming the previous Republican governor. Okay, he's gone. It's like blaming Bush for the bad economy in Obama's second term. It's like, fix it. They're not here anymore. If there's a problem, you do something to change it. It's on you. And then also with the voter fraud thing, it's like with the mail-in thing. Oh, there's no issues. Again, there were a bunch of issues in the past year, and that was just off the top of my head. And then also in other cities like Philadelphia, that's one of the reasons Giuliani went there. They have a history of voter fraud there too. It's not like people just woke up and decided there's fraud because we didn't get the outcome we liked. No, these places have histories of shady stuff going on. So when there's more shady stuff going on, people are going to look into it. That's all it is. Again, it's like if you're just going to say there's nothing here, you're either ignorant or you're lying to me.
And that crisis started in 2014, and that was when, to hear about things like this, you still needed the exposés by filmmakers or documentarians like Michael Moore going in and things like that. And that's not even really that long ago. 2014 is really not that long ago.
No.
But think about the media landscape that has changed between that time and now. Like it's about to be a brand new thing. I think you'd see a lot more exposés and inside info about the people. I don't remember seeing like, oh, this person was writing this on social media, or this is a background. Like now it's like something happens with somebody, then all of a sudden it's just 10 questions about this person. You see the background history, the person's history is looked into, the behavioral patterns, and also the politicians themselves now have to adjust to that kind of reality. And it's, like I said, it's not, different countries seem to just be on different kind of places in the world. It's human nature. We're all humans working in different ways. Just how you were mentioning, people used to hush people down because, like, if you find this out, your funding is going to be cut. You're going to be out of work. So it's going to be in you to actually not actually vote in a certain way, not expose a certain thing. Just like right now in China, it's kind of a thing where it's being shown. Some places happen to have outbreaks of COVID, but you're not reporting it because if you report it, the top CCP brass is saying, oh, it's supposed to be we're supposed to have no COVID deals. If something happens and it's your fault, not the people. You don't just get fired. You get removed. You get thrown in jail in those kind of situations. So it's different kind of concerns. But those pressures of the state structure, of that authoritative type of top-down structure, exist in different places in different ways. But it's still that X. It's just it's going to show up in different ways.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Next paragraph. Right. He made his way to the arena and sent word to his network. Within 45 minutes, dozens of reinforcements had arrived. As they entered the arena to provide a counterweight to the GOP observers inside, Rays took down their cell phone numbers and added them to a massive text chain. Racial justice activist from Detroit, Will Breathe, worked alongside suburban women from Femmes for Dems and local elected officials. Rays left at 3 a.m., handing the text chain over to a disability activist.
Yeah. Now, I'm just thinking about this situation. If you had something where you find that, and I think there's an extent to try to make this to seem bipartisan, because I'm wondering, do you think Reyes voted for Biden? Do you think Will Breathe over here voted for Biden? What do you think is actually going on? So I started to see, is that his actual name was like Will Breathe? No, so he said. And the activists from Detroit. Okay, because I thought it was activists from Detroit, comma, the way it's written. I thought it was like the person's name was Will Breed. I was like,
No.
huh? Somebody actually changed his name to that? But yeah, this is the hands up, don't shoot thing.
Yeah.
And then the Will Breathe now is a retake on what happened with George Floyd and those protests. Like, I can't breathe. It's been shown that he was saying I can't breathe before a policeman even touched him. But that's neither here nor there for, because apparently that doesn't really count, because now it's just a slogan. Just like hands up, don't shoot was just a slogan. That's not something that was in there. So it doesn't really match the actuality. But now that's a thing that's gone there. So this racial justice activist, isn't that supposed to be a thing where Republicans are completely against it? So there's supposedly no bias whatsoever.
Yeah.
Somebody thinks this other party literally is people who wouldn't want them to breathe, is not going to have any bias whatsoever in an election situation that would supposedly put in the ringleader that doesn't want them all to breathe. Like, come on now, people. If this was flipped over and this was people in all Republican-related parties, Republican-related activist groups, you would be calling foul on this. And if you won't, then if you wouldn't, then okay, then you're being consistent. If you would, if it, all of a sudden it would be okay if you do that, like let's say you're on the Republican side and you were reading this and you found out these were Republicans and it was okay, then you're also being biased. Just look at what's being said here and just think, is this the system that you want to work in? And now this also goes further into the things people can do. This is local level stuff. Why weren't there more Republican people involved in the structure to actually maintain this? And I think it's supposed to be in these places informally. You're supposed to have somebody from the two parties, but why is it just the two parties? Why is it more open? Like, why don't you have the technology where there's actually a live stream? And some of the places were being live streamed, and that's part of why they identified some of the people in that Georgia situation who still haven't come out and talked. But the cameras are supposed to be there. How many people are watching these? Those are the kind of things that I think people can do if you feel this secret cabal stole the election versus saved the election and fortified it. There's ways you can also fortify what you think is a positive system if the system is positive. Yeah.
Well, and it annoyed me too, because I saw an exchange between two people I know where they talked about the one person was complaining about the Capitol Hill thing, and then the other person was like, do you not remember the riots over the summer? All these buildings destroyed, 20-something people were killed. And then the person said something like, oh, well, you're not upset about the state murdering black people. Okay, first off, in 2019, 14 unarmed black people got killed by police. 14, not hundreds, not thousands, not one every 24, 28 hours. 14. Again, is that a tragedy? Yes, but again, there is no genocide of black people by evil racist white cops. And as we've discussed a few times, if you go into the details of these things, it's rarely a case of innocent black person shot for no reason. That's a narrative that's presented, but again, in almost every case you look into it, that's never reality. And again, I mean, the deaths, it's like, what was it? 15 people were struck by lightning that same year. 89 people, I think, killed by bees, wasps, and hornet stings. That I learned from Wilfred Riley too. It's like, again, it's like if you're of any race, you're way more likely to go outside and get stung to death by bees, wasps, and hornets and get killed by a police officer. It's like, but again, the media won't tell you that because they're Democrats, they're pro-Democrat, they have an agenda, so they're going to omit things, distort, lie, because this is the narrative they're hung up on. And if you don't see this, you're either part of the problem or you live in that Twitter, academia, mainstream media bubble.
Yeah, and for some situations, if you look at that and you say, okay, 14 is too many. Yes, it's too many. I don't know if it's too many. You have to talk, subjectively, you have to talk about that situation. But when you talk about the protests in the summer, 93% were mostly peaceful. We're still going to nominate this movement for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. So that was, let's say, there was 1,000 events in the summer of protests and things like that. And then 93%, that would mean 930 of them were peaceful. So you can't. So stop talking about those 70 that were. It was a 7. Yeah, 70. Stop talking about those 70 that were violent. Stop talking about the damage that was in there. Stop talking about the David Dorns that were killed by those 70 out of 930 compared to 930. But you want to focus on those 14 deaths out of how many police interactions with black. How many police interactions? How many times did somebody, probably a black person in the black community, call the police to come and deal with some issue with a black person? Yeah. And they didn't get, there wasn't any gunshot. No. Yeah. How many of that happened? So to focus on this and say this is the reason why there's systemic violence, systemic police brutality, and this is why we need this will breathe thing, then why can't we also talk about we need a will not have my store burnt down by racial justice protesters kind of movement? Because it's much higher than that 14 out of 100,000 or whatever,
Yeah.
or 10,000 or whatever. Maybe not 100,000, but the figures. So if you're saying if something is 93% one thing, we can define the whole thing by that when it comes to social political issues. Be consistent with that, but you're not being consistent with that. So that's kind of the thing that I have in mind here.
And it's the same thing with a lot of other things too, like driving. Like people freak out about car accidents, but again, what percentage of it and how many people get to places safely? Yeah, those accidents are tragic, but it's not like, okay, if you get into a car, the odds are high you're going to get killed on the way there. No, most people make it safely to the destination. Again, that doesn't mean don't be careful, but you're not going to not drive because you read of one accident somewhere out of the hundreds or thousands of cars that went through there one day. No.
And then again, with the episodic nature, people say, well, the difference is the police say they're supposed to be there to protect and serve. That's not what the police are. The police are enforcement agents. They enforce the laws. There's actually, you look at most actual rules of the police, there's nothing in most police actual orders and plans and things for them that they're supposed to prevent any crimes. They're not a crime prevention unit.
No.
They're a law enforcement unit.
Yeah.
After a crime has been committed, they come in and try to enforce the laws from that point. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But there's that false idea is protect and serve. That's not what the police is supposed to be there for. No. So, but people think because they're supposed to protect and serve, whenever they don't do that, they're breaking that. Yet protests, as AOC and other luminaries have said, who says, and Chris Cuomo and these kind of people, who say that protests are supposed to be peaceful? When was that ever a thing? People are supposed to be uncomfortable by these things. So that 7% is just protests being what they sometimes are. So that lack of consistency there carries across even in the argumentation for these things.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I think you can. As they mapped. I think it's you. Is it you or is it me?
No. I just read you.
You just read?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, so is it me? Is it as they mapped? Okay. Yeah. As they mapped out the steps in the election certification process, activists settled on a strategy of foregrounding, that's an odd word, foregrounding the people's right to decide, demanding their voices be heard, and calling attention to the racial implications and disenfranchising Black Detroiters. They flooded the Wayne County canvassing board. They flooded the Wayne County Canvassing Board's November 17 certification meeting with on-message testimony. Despite a Trump tweet, the Republican board members certified Detroit's votes.
Yeah. So for me, again, that's just more of the same race baiting. It's, the Republicans are unified in this. Of course, you have to leave out the threats that the Republicans got, the pressure that was put on them. And again, the fact that there are rhinos who will just side with the Democrats anyway. So I don't really see that as a compelling message.
But rhinos, I mean, Mitt Romney was actually the nominee for the Republican Party. So what do you mean he's a rhino? He's through and through a Republican. Like, of course, he's a party guy. But was Detroit the county that contains Detroit? Was that the one where there was a Democratic official on the board or something who was heard saying like, "Oh, are you the person who has a son who has a kid who goes to the school in this actual county in this kind of school area?" Like supposedly, it was just like an open so someone can say he was hinting that this person happens to live in a wealthy place, but then he's like, how about what's going to happen when your kid is in school and people and children of color see him and know that you're the parent that did this? It's like, what kind of language are these people using?
Yeah.
There's some things that I think have to be touched. There's some things with an article like this, like, actually, we never said anything about that, but it wasn't that. Yeah, you actually saw. That's why they even used a photo. They're like, look, this is actually people who are being blocked there, but we're not blocking them from coming in. They were coming in to disrupt. We're not going to show that there were people also inside who also didn't have masks on. They're talking about people. Everyone here at the window, I think most of the people here at the window seem to have masks on. So anyway,
Yeah, again, stop with the hypocrisy on things like violence and death threats. It's always like, oh, this person got threatened. This person's in fear for their life. Okay, but when this stuff happens like that, what is it? The state legislator about Republicans tread carefully. That one, like that whole thing.
Yep.
Mysteriously, that wasn't condemned. I mean,
Just watching that one live.
yeah, she was removed, I guess, from the committee or whatever. So in fairness, there was, but like you didn't see a lot of Democrats come out and say, "Oh, this woman is wrong. She has to be called out." No, it was either silence or looking the other way. So obviously, you're not going to be consistent on that death threat thing. It's only if it's a Republican doing it to a Democrat, it's a bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because in the actual hearing, on the presentation when Giuliani and his team were presenting people, she was asking this one American of Indian ancestry, Indian descent. She's actually first generation American. She's like, okay, what's your real name? She's like, what's your real name? I didn't get your real name because he's like, she said some name that I think was Americanized or something, or it was her maiden name. She's like, what's your actual name? Yeah. And just the way she was comporting herself, I was like, is this real? Is she really doing this? And I was like, yeah, she seems a bit unbalanced, a bit off. And then, as you mentioned, she went on Twitter and did a video about, yeah, you need to watch it. I mean, there's nothing about the electoral process that really makes me think it's going to select for people that are exemplary on ethical and moral standards. So when I see people like this, I'm not shocked, but I see that a lot more people were unaware of politics and the way the actual thing actually is and had a lot more trust in the system. And I'm seeing a lot more people who are actually rather appalled of how grimy the actual situation is. And I think recently the guy who was leading Trump's team, he had an interaction with somebody from CBS, and he seemed rather disgusted at what he'd experienced. And yeah, it's not for me. I would not want to enter politics personally.
Well, and I said when I reposted that on Facebook, I said, like, I would have been a little more subdued than him. I guess it's my personality, but I still would have, his overall message I agree with. I was like, yes, you're trying to frame this as there was no misinformation, there was no altering of evidence. There was. You're automatically making Trump out to be the bad guy. You're making any defense of him out to be a lie. I know what you're doing. You guys are Democrats masquerading as journalists, as reporting the facts. That's what I would have said. And then if the woman gets defensive, be like, okay, is there any situation in which Trump would have been in the right? And if the person can't answer that, well, all right, you're just showing where your allegiance goes.
She was minimizing the evidence and saying, oh, this is what was doctored. Like, it was just the changing of this to that. And then when you look at the fact checks that happened over Trump's term, some of the things is just him saying a word differently. Oh, he just made a joke, but you can't talk about it. It's not a joke. It doesn't matter. We need to fact check jokes. People have been fact checking memes. So I don't want to talk about this whole situation of saying it's not correct to do these. It's okay to just minimize things in that kind of sense.
All right, we can move on next.
If you can get the two next paragraphs.
Sure. All right. Election boards were one pressure point. Another was GOP-controlled legislatures who believed Trump could declare the election void and appoint their own electors. And so the president invited the GOP leaders of the Michigan legislature, House Speaker Lee Chatfield and Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, to Washington on November 20th. It was a perilous moment. If Chatfield and Shirkey agreed to do Trump's bidding, Republicans in other states might be similarly bullied. Quote, I was concerned things were going to get weird, says Jeff Timmer, a former Michigan GOP executive director turned anti-Trump activist. Norm Eisen describes it as, quote, the scariest moment, end quote, of the entire election.
Okay. Now here again, at least they're not saying it was illegal. They're saying he believed he could have done this. And there is precedent for this. This has happened. There's been other contested elections, and I think I did a reading of it because I was trying to research this information before. When I was right after the election, I read the actual Constitution and went into the actual details of the Bill of Rights, which is the amendments 1 to 10, and then the rest of the amendments 11 to 27, just to get the understanding. Because as I mentioned, people comment on things without actually understanding the things. People often say something's constitutional or non-constitutional. Like Alyssa Milano just recently put out a post talking about the senators who didn't vote were unpatriotic, and they didn't want to allow a tyrant to lose an election. And one of my friends posted is like, tyrants lose elections? Like, it was rich, like it was like tyrants lose elections. Like, yeah, tyrants don't even allow elections to happen.
No.
Like, when Putin runs, Putin's not even a tyrant in the classical sense. Even someone like Xi Jinping isn't a tyrant in the classical sense. Think about think about more like Kim Jong-un. Or Kim Jong, is it Un or Il? Who is it? It's Un right now, yeah. he has
Unia.
like what 97% voter turnout and things like that, and they're
Yeah.
all for him. Like when you get that kind of street, if there's a vote, it's going to be guaranteed if somebody is an actual tyrant. So it's more like they literally mean tyrant. But like Alyssa Milano has an idea of patriotism in her mind that includes her and includes Nancy Pelosi,
Yeah.
that includes, if you are on the political right, the most rabid person on the left that you can think of. That's included in her definition of patriotism because that's
Yeah.
how she defines the country. But the country itself, whether you think it's Trump or not, it's actually the Constitution is the thing that a nation state is built on. So constitutionally, actually, what Trump was doing was constitutionally agreed. There's some things that are kind of thing, and it's a document where it's only as good as the people who are willing to stick to it. It's a contract, but you can violate contracts. Contracts aren't like some magical thing that are binded into your skin that if you don't do it, you're going to like go into extreme pain. It's like no, people choose to be like, okay, we're not going to follow that anymore, and that's what happened with the impeachment trial. They're like, yeah, it's supposed to be only for people who are in there. We said the president is being impeached and the president will preside, yet they use the word president in the actual documents of impeachment, one meaning the former president and the other one meaning the actual current president. And also, if an impeachment fails, the president is supposed to remain as president. So now can you be like, okay, now you need to return Trump as president because like by the impeachment rules, if the person isn't impeached, they're not removed from office, so they should be in office. Like there's kind of situations. But these are things that change. For all we know, in 100 years, the United States of America won't exist. They might be an entirely different kind of political organization here, social political organization with a completely new constitution. We don't know. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say your example of tyrants and elections. I first learned about this was with my dad talking about Tito of Yugoslavia, where they said he won multiple elections, and my dad was saying like, yeah, but do you know what that means? It's like there is a quote unquote election, but you better vote for me, and that was basically how Tito held the former Yugoslavia together. It's all these groups, you hate each other, but stay together or I'll kill you, and that's sort of what kept it together. That when he died, that's when it started fracturing, because then Milosevic and all these other nationalist leaders started coming out and saying, no, we want this to become like I think with Milosevic, it was he wanted to genocide the other groups and make the whole country Serbia, basically. And then the
Yeah.
Bosnians did a similar thing and all that. So yeah, technically, officially, he was elected, but not really. And then with I took issue with the language of bullying the legislators. It's like they have a constitutional right to appoint their own electors. They can do that. Now, whether they want to or not, it's up to them. I don't think Trump said, okay, you have to do this or I'm going to make your life hell. And he didn't try to bribe them or anything as far as I know. So he just said, you have the right to do this. And the same thing in Pennsylvania. We're going to present this evidence. You can appoint electors if you agree with the evidence. It's up to you, but ultimately it falls on you guys. But you have that right as state legislators. That was the whole point. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Nothing yet in this actual document has been nothing you can submit from this document immediately. I mean, you can use it as evidence, circumstantial evidence of what people might have been talking about, like,
Yeah.
but there's nothing actually illegal here. There's nothing Trump did that was illegal. Even if you've been told by politicians and news models and things like that that Trump was fighting against democracy and he was a tyrant, it's unfortunate if you believe them literally,
Yeah.
but they weren't being literal. Trump isn't going to go to jail for any of those things. That's why I didn't really watch even the
No.
impeachment because I knew it was just political theater. They were going to
Yeah.
vote 50 anyway. Then a few other people were going to go there, as I called. There were a few people. I think it was like 57 of them that switched over. So that's the kind of situation where that was a known. It was kind of known to me that was going to be the deal because I kind of been jaded with the political theater. But for a lot of people, they really thought that's there. There's still a lot of people still think that, hey, all these things that we're talking about Trump for 4 years, now he's going to go to jail. There's going to be all these cases coming up. Like, oh, we didn't get him with the impeachment, but we're going to do all of a sudden these cases are going to come up in New York. He's going to be in jail. He's not going to jail.
No.
Even with the Hillary Clinton thing, they lock her up. That was just the thing. I didn't think she was ever actually going to jail. Like, that is such a long shot if that happens. Like this sort of world that would have to change for that to happen would be crazy. So that's not going to happen there. And also for those who are so far have heard about this, nothing in here is going to get any of these particular people in jail. There might be more investigations into it, but chances are under a Biden helmed Department of Justice, slim to none. But any more research into this is going to be done. But yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So the Democracy Defenders launched a full court press. Protect democracy's local contacts See, some of these things, I'm like, are they talking words or are these actually names of places? The names they use for some of these things are
Yeah.
just absurd. I'm
Yeah.
like, what? Protect democracy's local context. Research the lawmakers' personal and political motives. Issue one ran. Ah, issue one ran television ads in Lansing. The Chambers Bradley. The Chambers Bradley. What is these names? The Chambers Bradley kept close tabs on the process. One, the former Republican congressman, called his former colleague Mike Rogers, who wrote wrote an op-ed for the Detroit newspapers urging officials to honor the will of the voters. Three former Michigan governors, Republicans John Engler and Rick Snyder, and Democrat Jennifer Granholm, jointly called for Michigan's electoral votes to be cast free of pressure from the White House. Engler, a former head of the Business Roundtable, made phone calls to influential donors and fellow GOP elder statesmen who could press the lawmaker privately. Yeah.
I think Snyder was the one who was in charge during the Flint thing, because I remember one of the ways they were trying to blame it was that I think he was trying to reform the state's budget, so he was cutting things, and I think that was part of the blame of, well, you're not spending money to improve infrastructure, so you cutting that funding is causing all these people to get poisoned. Now, of course, I would point out in all these Democrat-run cities that they spend like drunken sailors, they always raise taxes. You don't see the city actually improving, so it's not clear that the money being spent is really the problem here.
Yeah. And this is another thing that I noticed with these. You look at this, check the histories of these people, check their backgrounds, check the scandals they've been involved in, check how successful they've been at different positions as they work their way up the political ladder. Because people rightfully object to things in like CEOs. Oh, this person seemed to fail at this company, and then all of a sudden he's in this other company. In those cases, some of the things are very rather complicated in order to do. Like a small group of people can actually manage that kind of workload. But it's also similar in politics. A small group of people are actually willing to engage and get this grimy and do the insides and outs. And when you're working your way up to here, you're getting a Rolodex. Rolodex, for those who didn't live pre digital information, was this thing with literal cards in it that you'd put people's numbers on, and then you'd roll it around. It's like a deck of cards, that kind of thing. So, but these people, they get secrets from each other. That's why it goes further. In our regular lives, like I said, we tell lies, we manage things. Oh, my husband is abusive, but he gives me all these other things. That's understandable. But when it comes to these kind of levels, to see the kind of rot and political issues that come with this, the skeletons you have to keep, the backs you have to scratch, and these other things, it's a whole incestuous relationship where you will see these kind of characters constantly shifted around. And I'm seeing, it's weird to me because it's not weird, but it's elucidating to me to see how many people are actually surprised when Biden is bringing up these other names and people from like pre-times and like, oh, why are you bringing this person back? I thought this person was not, but this person said that. But it's strange seeing people coming into this new awareness of things that I was kind of familiar with for some time. But yeah.
Well, to add to your point about CEOs being fired, this is why the whole concept of golden parachutes exists. Like, people see this as, why should they get paid if they get fired? It's like, well, you have to understand what goes into becoming a CEO. These are very competent business people who are in a lot of demand. They know they're going to be under a lot of pressure. Of course, the board can fire them if they want. And the board is accountable to the stockholders, all that. So they have to sort of weigh the risk of, should I take all these risks on? And there has to be some reward either way. And even if it doesn't work out, there still has to be a reward because they're still at the helm for any certain amount of time. So as a way of enticing good people to get in, that's one of the things they offer. Like, again, go back to the actor analogy. You have to pay these actors this much money because they know they bring in this many people. They have to be enticed to take the role. Otherwise, if you say DiCaprio star in a movie for $1 million, he's going to be like, well, no, I can make way more than that. It's the same thing with these. It's another form of compensation to get the best talent. That's why.
And you also see it in sports, and I think the sporting world is a good place to people to learn things about life, because I think life continues to be a competitive thing, and the sporting world in general is rather meritocratic in the sense that if you can actually score the goal, if you can actually run the ball, if you can actually catch the ball, you're going to get some kind of actual achievements for that and rewards. And you have some situations where someone's like, okay, I'm going to trade this player, but I'm going to make sure to trade them to another team, or I'll pay them a little extra, or I'll let them go in these kind of situations. And it's a similar thing with CEOs, where somebody might understand there might have been something in the company that made the company fail, but the CEO is going to take the bullet. He's going to take the eventual blame for that, the actual responsibility for that. But at the same time, we don't want them going to our next competitor. So sometimes you'll pay them to actually not work for a year
Yeah.
because you don't want them just going next door, and then next door might not have those other issues that aided the CEO in actually failing at this thing. They might be better at it, or he might take some secrets. So there's kind of things that are kind of in there. And you don't see that much in politics. You don't really see someone's, okay, this guy was working with the Democrats and all of a sudden they switch parties and now they're working with the Republicans. And I think part of the reason you don't see that, because it's a uniparty. They're already all together. They do the same kind of things, just with a little different spin and spice on it. So there's no real point to like jump across the aisle in this kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next one, where if Trump were to offer something, right? Okay. If Trump were to offer something in exchange for a personal favor, that would likely constitute bribery. Basson reasoned. He phoned Richard Primus, a law professor at the University of Michigan, to see if Primus agreed and would make the argument publicly. Primus said he thought the meeting itself was inappropriate and got to work on an op-ed for Politico, warning that the state attorney general, a Democrat, would have no choice but to investigate. When the piece posted on November 19th, the Attorney General's communications director tweeted it. Protect Democracy soon got word that the lawmakers plan to bring lawyers to the meeting with Trump the next day. All right.
See, like right here, this is poisoning the well. This is politics. This is what politics is, and this is why I would not enter politics, because there's never in here that they said, we heard Trump was offering.
Yeah.
They just said, if Trump was going to do this, it would be illegal. So we'll bring this up with somebody because we know that we're counting on this person actually talking about it, and then we'll use that as a premise to cover it and bring a lawyer to the actual place. There's a preemptive thing in this kind of situation. It's like pre-crime type of situation, because this is what politics is. It's the kind of entrapment, because they know that that's a common thing that politicians do. Yeah. So they were assuming that, of course, Trump is probably going to do that because that's probably what we would do if we were in his position. But most of the public out there just hears the news report saying, because Trump could offer this, we have to bring lawyers. When there was never an actual inkling that Trump was actually going to offer anything. It was just this possibility, and that doesn't come out. So I'm glad to actually see it here, and the few people who read it, the few people who are here with us watching. What is your take on it? Because that's my reading of this kind of situation, of one of the readings.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and I know he's not stupid enough to say, "Hey guys, do this for me, and I'll give you money." I mean, that they would be after him in 2 seconds if he did that. And so it's like he most likely, again, I wasn't there obviously, but he most likely said, "You have this right as state legislatures to do this. I appreciate it if you would, but I don't think there were any threats or bribery."
Yeah. The main thing that was taken out, like I think one of the few things was taken out of context I'd like to speak on, was the talk that he had with the Georgia secretary, who again released that. And you see with that one, they were kind of that's the kind of things that catches them, this kind of double standards that they have. With that one, that was supposed to be a privileged conversation before an actual trial coming in, and it was a part of a longer thing. And he said, I don't even need that. He was pointing out the different discrepancies that he'd been seeing in different issues that his people were providing as evidence. And he said, all you have to do is find 11,000, because that's the actual difference. He wasn't telling him to go and find 11,000 and make up 11,000. He said, if you actually looked into it, you could find a discrepancy with this many votes. Yeah. But it was covered in one way. And that person leaking out, the attorney general, whoever it did, leaked that conversation out. That was supposed to be privileged. That was supposed to be off the record in that kind of sense. And they used that, and that was something that was constantly talked. That was something that was brought up in the impeachment trial. So you have all these news sources talking about that, all the people on the left using that as a thing, ignoring that it was privileged. And then now it comes out with this deputy press person excoriating that female reporter. It was off the record. So some of those same people are now like, well, that was off the record. She shouldn't have released that. Were you saying that when the Georgia politician released it? Or was that a thing where it was like, okay, now all of a sudden that's a thing to do?
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Okay, next one.
Sure.
Raises activists scanned flight schedules and flocked to the airports on both ends of Shirley's journey to D.C. to underscore that lawmakers were being scrutinized. After the meeting, the pair announced they'd pressed the president to deliver COVID relief for their constituents and informed him that they saw no role in the election process. Then they went for a drink at the Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue. A street artist projected their images onto the outside of the wall of the building, along with the words, "The world is watching."
All right. Well, this thing about COVID relief is stupid because I remember they were pressing Pelosi to sign the relief bill for the longest time, but she said no because she wasn't sure how the election would turn out. Then Trump, quote unquote, lost, and then all of a sudden the bill went through. Of course, $600, not the 2,000. So this was obviously politically motivated. This wasn't really about helping people. And the fact that she's still ranting about this second stupid impeachment rather than saying, "Hey, how do we get things back to normal?" It shows where the true motivations lie here. Yeah.
Well, some of the spins already come there. They're saying, "Oh, we decided to call the impeachment short because now we want Biden's agenda to come in." And some people are like, "No, we want Trump in jail." And they're like, "Oh no." Some other people are like, "Yeah, it's good. It's at least we didn't get him in jail, but we get the agenda going." So that's the way politics works. It's about making the best out of what you have. And here, like Maxine Watts was talking about, you need to find them wherever you are. Right after the whole situation, they were talking about how Lindsey Graham was being hounded by a few MAGA people in the airport. That was like a horrible thing. I can't believe you're doing this to the politicians. They just mentioned here that they were following the person and tracking them from DC to back to Michigan. They're talking about it's not 1984. This is the whole like not the Big Brother watching thing. That Big Brother, the world. That Big Brother, the world is watching. We're actually going to project your image onto the outside of a building where you are. That is not threatening whatsoever. What is going on with these people? How do they not see these things?
Yeah, I'm waiting for AOC to come out again and complain about the failed impeachment and say this is ridiculous. I'm a victim. There should be restitution or something. And it's like, just shut up, please. It's like,
I think with her, like I said, part of her charm to me is that she exposes the X, and she's not as wily as a Pelosi in a political animal sense, where she just comes out and says things, and people actually get to see as close to what the things are as they possibly can. But she's also someone who's learning. She's a human being. She has a team around her. I'm sure someone has gotten to her already and like, okay, like you're going to be in here for the next 2 years, or like, come on, you need to hush a bit. She's the senators are in for the 6-year terms. It's Congress people is 4 years or 2 years.
A good question. I should know this, actually. I'm not sure.
4 years. I think it's 4 years. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Next one's you.
All right. That left one, last step. The state canvassing board, made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. One Republican, a Trumper employed by DeVos's political family's political nonprofit, was not expected to vote for certification. The other Republican on board was a little-known lawyer named Aaron Van Langevelde. He sent no signals about what he planned to do, leaving everyone on edge. All right.
I think it's supposed to be me reading, but anyway. So, so it's not accepted to certification. So I think this is kind of on the board. These are just the things that they're doing. So the Republican on the board is a list. So this is just a listing of the usual suspects, or the main suspects, or the characters that were involved in the thing, to how that unfolded. And this is interesting that they focus particularly on this. There were other issues that were up. Georgia has been a case, but Georgia had a lot of Republicans who were some kind of shady type of. And I think they're talking about the bipartisan thing, because if you actually follow the bipartisan aspect and you focused on the Republicans involved in there to talk about this bipartisan movement that you had, you would see that those Republicans that were in question were not really that bipartisan. They were very antagonistic to Trump for some time. You will get the thing where you'll find Senator Loeffler and Perdue, who came up. Or Perdue the governor? Was it Loeffler and Perdue? The 2 senators
Kemp,
that were
Kemp
up
is the governor, right?
Okay, it was Loeffler and Perdue who were up against Warnock, and I'm forgetting the other guy's name.
Yeah.
But they came up with that. If you talked about that, you'd probably have to bring up Warnock's situation with a video of him with his wife talking about, this is a politician, they hide the things, like he actually ran over me with his car. It's allegedly. There's police footage of this. There's the issue with the school that he had where some kids supposedly were abused. And then you'd have to talk about how Loeffler and those people were involved in insider trading. You'd have to go in and talk about how Loeffler and Perdue were talking about, even before the actual election and things, like they were caught in the video being like, yeah, we're looking forward to work with Biden. So this whole idea that was bipartisan, where it's like, oh, everybody who's a Republican likes Trump. No, that's not the case at all. Like the Secretary General was actively against Trump for the entire time. So why are they picking on this state in particular versus Michigan versus Arizona? No, Michigan's what they're talking about here, right? Versus Arizona versus Pennsylvania versus Georgia. Because Pennsylvania, I think the Attorney General in Pennsylvania said, "Oh, it's not even an issue. Don't even worry about this. Like Biden's going to win." He said this like back in November, before they were actually looking into the things. So the biases and the things that are in there are kind of questionable.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
House of Representatives term is 2 years, so I guess she's up again for election. I, that just seems awfully short. Like it seems like
Yeah.
you'd already be in campaign mode again. You'd probably be campaign mode every other year.
Yeah.
It should be term limits. Okay, so next one. When the meeting began, is it when the meeting began? Yeah, when the meeting began, various activities flooded the live stream and filled Twitter with their hashtags. All aliyesomni. Is that somebody's
All
name?
eyes on me. It looks like it's like a me, but me is mi.
Then my foreign ass is like thinking, okay, that's somebody's actual name. Aliyesomni. All eyes on me, but why mi instead of me? Maybe all eyes on me was like a Tupac song. Maybe that would get something else out there. Maybe this
Well,
is
it's also Spanish. Reyes is a Spanish name, so I didn't know if it was like a play on that, like me, like my. I don't know.
Oh, on me. So okay.
Yeah.
So the hashtag all eyes on me. A board accustomed to attendance in the single digits suddenly faced an audience of thousands. In hours of testimony, the activists emphasized their message of respecting voters' wishes and affirming democracy rather than scolding the officials. Van Langevelde?
I say Langevelde, but that's like the German.
Is that Scandinavian or German?
It's a Dutch name. Anything that starts with Van is Dutch, but like it's
Van
close enough to
Langevelde.
German. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Okay. Van Langevelde quickly signaled he would follow precedent. The vote was 3-0 to certify. The other Republicans abstained. Let me just hit this last one.
Sure.
After that, the dominoes fell. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and the rest of the states certified their electors. Republican officials in Arizona and Georgia stood up to Trump's bullying, and the Electoral College voted on schedule. Okay, that kind of answered my question of why they focused on this.
All right.
Go ahead.
So again, I mean, I don't really have much else to say here. The usual affirming democracy quote means getting the result we want. The same thing about Republicans on board again, rhinos, establishment. Yeah, I mean, it's just stuff I've said already. So I don't really have much else to add to that. I don't think.
Yeah, and this answered the question that I had before. They chose that because they think that was a precedent setter, and that's what happens in politics a lot. People just wait, and they don't want to be the person who's actually catching. But as I said, with the political way to actually campaign is mostly this is why you shouldn't vote for that person. That person is going to do all these bad things. They're going to fail at this. Because if you go out and you say, this is what I'm going to do, when you're in there, there's going to be a list of things people can hold you to. But if you were campaigning on why the other person was going to suck, all you have to do is not suck as much as you said that person was going to suck. And there's going to be fewer things to hold you on. They're not going to know what to hold you on. And that's something that's also come with Biden. If you voted for Biden, what are the actual things besides it not being Trump? And many people came out. Settle for Biden was literally an official, accepted big campaign push. So that's one thing that's going to be tough for people because people had very few actual expectations. But now those same expectations that they had of Trump, that they said were being failed, they think all of a sudden Biden's going to come in and do. It's not. You're going to get more big candy hearts in the yard of the White House with like happiness and unity and things like that's what you're going to get. You're not actually going to get actual results.
And it was funny too because the Settle for Biden was also an Instagram page, and it was another one of those things I thought was satire. But then I checked, I found out that people lefties that I used to follow were following it. So I'm like, oh no, this is an actual real thing.
That was pretty crazy. Okay, we've been recording for almost an hour now, a little over. I think let's just push through and get to the end. I think we've had a few that were over. We should be able to get this done before we get too far past the 1.5 hour point. So yeah, well, you've seen it in the last one, the magic of post-production that we were talking about. Should we continue since we at that point we had just gone over? I think we were about an hour, 10 minutes for that first part, and we were trying to keep it towards an hour. So we ended up talking for about 45 more minutes to finish up the thing.
Yep.
So what we're going to do here is, I guess, just do a little wind down of what we were talking about. Just anything you want to say to the people?
Not really. I mean, it's mostly stuff I've said already, so I don't think I have much more to add. Yeah.
We're trying to get this in a way where we can actually get to this content as much as possible and share it. So for now, we just finished recording the second part, the last part, which is how close we came. And as you mentioned, that was another 45 minutes. And that one will have continued thoughts. And that's more of like a direct stream of thoughts. So I guess it's not really too much more to say now. Besides, thanks for listening. And until next time, please check that out. And this is a bit. one thing we mentioned in the last one is the next conversation we're going to have is human action, reading the book by Ludwig von Mises, and that's going to be in there. And there's a bunch of other series. Of the series that we've had, which one do you suggest people would listen to if they like the stuff we were talking about here?
I mean, the 1619 one I think is good. It's not super long. Cynical Theories is definitely longer and more in depth, but it's broken up that you can just focus on specific topics if that's easier for you. The stuff about food people may find interesting. I mean, people like talking to me about food, so there's a few videos you can watch as standalone things. Again, it depends. Like certain things like the 1619, like I say, are not super long. I mean, they make a little more sense if you watch them all together, but you don't have to. Same with the Cynical Theories thing. This one, of course, you should watch the whole series, but we tried to break it up into about videos of an hour or so each. That way it's like you don't have to sit down for 5, 6, 7 hours, listen to the whole thing. Yeah.
Some of those are longer. Some of those are you're going like 3 hour long conversations.
Yeah.
But with that content, part of why I think we're not so surprised with this content is the 1619 project. Cracks in the Ivory Tower shows that what the cathedral has been doing. Critical theory shows some of the backing of why people can say some of these things and the usage of the words that they're using in these kind of sense. It's like, okay, the worst thing you can do, don't assume somebody is thinking the thing that you would have to think to use that word. That goes. It's a play that I'm doing on the whole Princess Bride type of thing. Like, oh, you keep using that word, but I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Exactly.
It's like, no, I go further. I say they're using that word, but that word doesn't think what I think they think it means because they clearly think something. The people clearly think that the campaign was fortified. They clearly think that Trump needed all this kind of content. The issue is, you don't really think they think what you would mean by fortify. So that's it for now, I guess. Till next time, guys, girls, and everything else in between. Goodbye.
Bye.
All right.